A past that never faded. The golden rays of morning light stretched lazily across the Carter estate, illuminating the vast gardens that surrounded the grand mansion. Dew glistened on the delicate petals of roses and orchids, creating an ethereal shimmer as the gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers through the air. The estate was a masterpiece of luxury, polished stone pathways winding through endless rows of perfectly pruned hedges, ivy-covered archways, and fountains whispering their tranquil song in the background. Ethan Carter stood by his bedroom window, watching it all in silence. He had spent years meticulously crafting his wealth, ensuring that every part of his estate radiated the success and power he had accumulated. And yet, despite it all, the beauty of it felt hollow, empty. Because in the end, no amount of wealth, no carefully sculpted hedge, or imported marble statue could fill the void left inside him. It had been 19 years. 19 years since the night that shattered his world. The night Emily disappeared. He inhaled deeply, suppressing the familiar ache that always clawed at him whenever his thoughts strayed to his little girl. His only child. He had given her everything. A life of comfort, love, and security. Yet it hadn't been enough. One moment, she had been safe in her bed, tucked in under the softest blankets money could buy, and the next, gone. Vanished without a trace. The police investigation had stretched for years. The best private detectives had been hired, and he had spared no expense in his search. But no one could find her. The only clue had been a single object found near a river miles away. A small silver butterfly pendant. Emily's pendant. His fingers clenched involuntarily as the memory resurfaced. That delicate piece of jewelry had been a gift from him on her 5th birthday. He had chosen it carefully, knowing how much she loved butterflies. It had always rested against her tiny collarbone, a symbol of the bond they shared. And when the pendant was found, a piece of his heart had broken beyond repair. They had assumed the worst. Everyone had. Time passed, and the world moved on. But Ethan never truly did. He turned away from the window, loosening the silk tie around his neck before making his way downstairs. It was an unspoken routine, walking through the gardens in the early morning. He rarely interacted with the gardeners. They came and went, tending to the estate, ensuring it remained as pristine as always. He hardly noticed them. But today was different. As he reached the eastern section of the gardens, something unusual caught his eye. A young woman knelt near the hydrangeas, carefully pruning the bushes with an expertise that suggested years of experience. She wore faded work jeans and a simple button-up shirt, her hands covered in dirt-streaked gloves. Her chestnut-brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She was focused, meticulous, lost in her work. Ethan might have walked past her, might have continued on as he always did, buried in his own thoughts. But then he saw it. His breath caught in his throat, and suddenly, the world around him seemed to blur. The pendant. A small silver butterfly pendant gleamed softly against her skin, swaying gently as she moved. His body tensed. It was impossible. A coincidence, surely. His mind struggled to rationalize it, to dismiss the wave of emotions crashing over him. But deep in his gut, something else stirred, something raw and unrelenting. Hope. For the first time in years, hope clawed its way back into his chest, with a force so strong it made his hands tremble. "Excuse me," he called, his voice rougher than intended. The young woman startled slightly before turning her head. And the moment their eyes met, Ethan felt something inside him shift. Her eyes, warm, deep brown, held an unspoken sorrow, a quiet strength. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, she felt familiar. "Yes, sir," she asked, standing up and wiping her hands on her jeans. His gaze flickered back to the pendant. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. Every small curve, every tiny detail. It was the pendant. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. "That necklace," he said, keeping his tone measured. "Where did you get it?" She instinctively reached for the butterfly. brushing her fingers over it as if it were second nature. A small, almost self-conscious smile formed on her lips. "Oh, this," she said, glancing down. "I've had it for as long as I can remember. It's the only thing I had when I was adopted." The world tilted beneath him. Adopted. Ethan felt as if the air had been punched out of his lungs. His voice came out strained. "How old were you?" The young woman frowned slightly, as if confused by his sudden interest. 4, maybe. I don't really remember much before that," she admitted. "They told me I was found alone on the side of a road." Ethan staggered back half a step. No, it couldn't be. This wasn't happening. Lauren. That was her name. He vaguely recalled the head gardener mentioning hiring someone new. Lauren Bennett. His mind spun. He had spent nearly 2 decades chasing shadows, following every dead-end lead. And now, standing before him, completely unaware of the storm raging inside him, was a young woman who could be his daughter. "Sir." Lauren's voice pulled him back. "Are you okay?" He forced a nod, though his entire body was trembling. "Fine," he muttered, though it was a blatant lie. Nothing about this moment was fine. Lauren hesitated before dusting off her jeans. "Well, I should get back to work." She turned, oblivious to the realization Ethan was grappling with, oblivious to the fact that she had just shaken the very foundation of his world. As she walked away, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number, one he hadn't called in years. The line rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Andrews," came the gruff reply. Ethan took a slow, shaky breath. "I need you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. Then, "Need me for what?" Ethan exhaled, his gaze still locked on Lauren's retreating figure. "Find out everything you can about my new gardener." Another pause. "Your gardener?" Andrews repeated, clearly puzzled. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. "Yes," he confirmed. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before saying the words that made his chest ache. "She might be my daughter." And for the first time in 19 years, Ethan Carter dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was about to find the answer that had eluded him for so long. The past wasn't done with him yet, and neither was fate. Whispers of the past. Ethan Carter had spent nearly 2 decades searching for a truth that had always seemed just out of reach. But now, as he stood in the vast expanse of his estate, watching the young gardener move through the flower beds with a familiarity that twisted something deep inside him, he felt the impossible. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a certainty. Something about her, the way she carried herself, the pendant around her neck, even the way she looked at him with cautious curiosity, felt like pieces of a puzzle he had tried to solve for years. And now, they were beginning to fit. As Lauren worked, her hands deftly tending to the plants, Ethan barely heard the sound of his phone vibrating in his pocket. His heart pounded as he pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Andrews. He took a deep breath before answering. "Tell me you have something." A sigh crackled through the line. "It's been less than 24 hours, Carter. I don't perform miracles." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had spent years in silent suffering, but now that hope had ignited in him, patience was impossible. "What do you have?" He pressed, his voice sharper than intended. A pause. Then, Andrews spoke carefully. "Her name is Lauren Bennett, 23 years old. Grew up in the foster system after being found abandoned near a highway in upstate New York when she was about 4 years old." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Found alone," he repeated, though he had already known the answer. Andrews continued. "No parents. No records before that. Just a toddler with no name and that pendant around her neck." Ethan turned away from the garden, staring into the distance as his mind reeled. Who adopted her? A couple in Brooklyn. Richard and Lisa Bennett. Nothing unusual about them. Middle class. Good people. No criminal records. They adopted her when she was 7. She grew up normal, had decent grades, nothing out of the ordinary. Moved out at 18, took up gardening, worked a few jobs before ending up on your estate. Ethan's pulse was a drumbeat against his ribs. No official birth records before she was found. None. It's like she just appeared out of nowhere. A heavy silence stretched between them. Ethan had spent years looking for Emily, hiring the best detectives, pouring every resource he had into tracking down even the faintest lead. And yet here she was, possibly under his own roof, tending to his flowers. And she had no idea. "I need more," he muttered. Andrews sighed again. "DNA, Carter. That's the only way to be sure." Ethan exhaled slowly. He already knew that. But the thought of walking up to her and asking for a DNA sample was ridiculous. He needed to be subtle. "I'll get it," he said finally. "Be careful," Andrews warned. "If she really is your daughter, you don't want to scare her away before you know the truth." Ethan ended the call and pocketed his phone, turning back toward the garden. He watched Lauren for a long moment as she carefully inspected a row of white roses, her fingers brushing over the petals as if they were something precious. There was something poetic about it. She was here, standing on the land she should have grown up on, among the flowers she should have picked as a child. And yet she didn't know. Not yet. A silent storm. Ethan knew he had to tread carefully. If he rushed this, if he let his emotions control him, he could lose her before he even confirmed the truth. So instead of charging straight toward her with questions, he did something he rarely did. He observed. Lauren moved with quiet purpose, her hands working the soil with practiced ease. There was something calming about her presence, something that reminded him of Maria, Emily's mother. She had loved the garden. She would take Emily outside on warm summer evenings, teaching her how to plant flowers, her soft laughter filling the air. Ethan swallowed hard. The past was closing in on him faster than he could handle. "Lauren," he called, forcing his voice to sound casual. She looked up, brushing dirt from her hands. "Yes, Mr. Carter." He walked closer, careful to keep his posture relaxed, though his mind was spinning. "You've been doing good work here." She tilted her head slightly, surprised. "Thank you, sir. You seem to have a natural talent for this," he continued. "Did you always want to be a gardener?" A small smile played on her lips. "Not exactly," she admitted. "I actually wanted to be a botanist. I used to dream about working in conservation, traveling to study rare plants." She shrugged. "But college wasn't really in the cards for me. So I took the next best thing." Ethan frowned. "Your adoptive parents didn't encourage it." Lauren hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her head. "They tried. But money was tight. And honestly, I never felt like I belonged in the academic world. I like being hands-on." Ethan nodded, though his thoughts were miles away. If she was Emily, she should have had everything. A life of privilege. A childhood filled with opportunities. But instead, she had been left alone on the side of a road, raised by strangers, never knowing who she really was. It made his blood boil. But he forced himself to stay calm. "I'd like to offer you something," he said finally. Lauren's brows furrowed. "Offer me something." He gestured toward the house. "Come inside. Have some tea. I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you." A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but then she nodded. "All right." Ethan turned, leading the way back to the mansion, his heart pounding with every step. He wasn't just bringing her inside for a conversation. He was bringing her into the life that had been stolen from her. The test of truth. The kitchen of the Carter estate was as extravagant as the rest of the mansion. Marble countertops, state-of-the-art appliances, and a dining area that could easily seat 20. But today, it felt smaller, more intimate, as Ethan poured 2 cups of tea and set them on the table. Lauren sat across from him, looking slightly out of place in her gardening clothes against the pristine luxury. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, "what did you want to talk about?" Ethan took a slow sip of his tea, carefully formulating his words. I've been looking for someone to help redesign parts of the garden. Someone with a vision. I think you might be the right person." Her eyes widened slightly. "Me? You seem to care about this place," he said simply. "I think you could do something special with it." Lauren blinked, clearly caught off guard. "That's really generous of you." Ethan offered a small smile. "Consider it an investment." She hesitated before taking a sip of her tea, and that was when Ethan saw it. A single strand of hair falling over her shoulder. His pulse quickened. He needed a sample. A hair, saliva from the tea, anything that could give him a DNA match. He kept the conversation going, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. They spoke about plants, travel, things that had nothing to do with the truth he was seeking, but every moment was calculated. Then, after she finished her tea, she set the cup down. "That was nice," she said with a smile. "I should get back to work." Ethan nodded, his fingers tightening under the table. He had what he needed. As she left the kitchen, he carefully lifted the cup and placed it in a plastic bag. This was it. A few strands of DNA stood between him and the truth. If the results came back positive, then Lauren wasn't just a gardener. She was his daughter. And someone had stolen her from him. But Ethan Carter wasn't a man who let things go. If someone had taken Emily from him, they were about to learn the hard way. No secret stays buried forever. The truth that changed everything. Ethan Carter sat in his study, staring at the sleek, unopened envelope on his desk. It had arrived that morning, hand-delivered by a private courier. Inside it was the answer to the question that had haunted him for nearly 2 decades. Is Lauren really Emily? His hands trembled slightly as he reached for it. He hadn't felt this kind of fear in years, not in business, not in life. But this was different. This was personal. Just as he was about to open it, a soft knock echoed through the room. "Come in," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The door creaked open, and Lauren stepped inside. She hesitated for a moment before closing the door behind her. She started, then faltered, wringing her hands. "I need to talk to you." Ethan pushed the envelope aside, forcing himself to focus. "Of course. What is it?" She took a slow breath, as if gathering her thoughts. I had a dream last night," she admitted. "A memory, I think. But it felt more like a feeling than an actual event. It was warm, safe. I was small, wrapped in a soft blanket, and someone was singing to me. A lullaby." Ethan felt his heart clench. Maria used to sing to Emily every night before bed. Lauren shook her head, frustrated. "I don't know why, but I woke up feeling like I had lost something important, something I should remember." Ethan swallowed hard. He had wanted to wait until he had proof. He had wanted to be absolutely sure before saying anything. But Lauren was already on the edge of discovering the truth herself. It was time. "Lauren," he said carefully, gesturing for her to sit. She did, watching him with wary curiosity. "What if I told you that there might be a reason for those memories?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then reached into the drawer and pulled out an old, worn, leather-bound book. He opened it to a specific page and turned it toward her. It was a picture of Emily, taken just days before she disappeared. Lauren's breath hitched. She reached out slowly, her fingers tracing over the faded photograph. This is me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan exhaled. "I believe so." Lauren looked up at him, eyes wide and searching. "You think I'm my daughter," Ethan confirmed softly. "My Emily." A silence stretched between them, thick with emotions neither of them knew how to process. Lauren shook her head, disbelief warring with something deeper. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, her voice wavered. Ethan pushed the envelope toward her. "This is a DNA test. I haven't opened it yet." He exhaled slowly. "I wanted you to be here when I did." Lauren swallowed hard, staring at the envelope as if it held the weight of the universe. With trembling fingers, she reached for it. She tore the seal carefully, unfolding the paper inside. Her eyes scanned the words, her breath catching in her throat. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She lifted her gaze to Ethan, her voice breaking. "It's true." Ethan nodded, emotion constricting his throat. For the first time in 19 years, he allowed himself to feel it. Hope. Relief. A love so deep it nearly shattered him. Lauren let out a shaky breath, her hands tightening around the paper as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Ethan murmured. "I know this is a lot. And I know it doesn't change everything overnight. But Lauren, you were never supposed to be lost." A sob escaped her then, and before she could stop herself, she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around him. Ethan froze for only a second before he returned the embrace, his arms tightening around his daughter, the daughter he had mourned, the daughter he had searched for, the daughter he thought he had lost forever. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the years apart, not the pain, not even the mystery of how she had been taken from him in the first place. Because now, she was home, unraveling the past. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Lauren struggled to reconcile the life she had lived with the truth of where she had come from. She had spent years believing she was unwanted, abandoned. And yet, here was a father who had never stopped looking for her. It was overwhelming. Ethan, for his part, gave her space when she needed it and answers when she asked. He shared old photographs, memories of her childhood, stories about her mother, Maria, who had never stopped singing lullabies, even in the depths of grief. But there was still one unanswered question. Who had taken her? Ethan's determination burned hotter than ever. He had spent years searching for his daughter, and now that she was found, he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. And then the truth found them. A package arrived at the Carter estate one morning. No return address, no sender. Inside was a letter, and a single photograph. Ethan unfolded the letter first, his breath catching at the first words. "You were never supposed to find her." His grip tightened, his pulse quickening as he read on. "But you did. And now you're asking the wrong questions. The truth isn't about who took her. It's about why she was taken." Ethan's blood ran cold. Lauren, who had been standing beside him, looked over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted to the photograph. It was an old picture, grainy but unmistakable. A young Emily, no more than 4 years old, standing beside someone Ethan knew all too well. Someone he had trusted. His sister, Rebecca. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. Lauren gasped, covering her mouth. "No, that's Rebecca," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. His own sister had been involved. His hands curled into fists. All these years, he had believed Emily had been stolen by a stranger. But now, the truth stared back at him from the photograph. The betrayal was closer than he ever could have imagined, and Ethan Carter was not a man who let betrayals go unanswered. As the storm gathered in his chest, he turned to his daughter, the daughter he had found, the daughter who had been stolen from him, and he made a silent vow. The past was done stealing from them. Now, it was time to take back what had been stolen. All of it. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.